I think giving from your wealth is one of the best ways to fight against the love of it. And so get in the habit of giving money, of tithing.
And get in the habit of it hurting a little bit.
Yes.
Welcome to the 1 Degree Podcast. Our goal for this time is for you to leave inspired to be a more faithful follower of Jesus in this world and to view everything through the lens of the gospel.
Each week, we'll chat about anything from healthy habits to resolving conflict in relationships to managing time well to even some deep theological topics. We're your hosts, Nathaniel and Zan Sibley. Grab a spot on our comfy virtual couch and come join the conversation.
What is up, 1 Degree fam? Happy to be here on our virtual cozy couch. Zan, tell us where they are on our virtual cozy couch in whatever.
That was a brutal sentence. We are sitting at Nathaniel's family's kitchen table. Would you call it that?
My parents' house. But for those of you who don't know my parents, they...
Pretty much everyone here.
Yep. But they have a barn that was built in the 1800s that they converted into a house, which is really cool in and of itself. But what's not really cool is that, you'll get it in a second, is that they only choose to air condition half the house. So they only air condition the bedroom side. So the living room side and the kitchen side.
For context, that kind of sounds weird, or like, how would that happen? But it's like one hallway full of bedrooms and then big vaulted ceilings and loft for the rest. So it has a very clear cutoff. But yes, it
saves money and everything
all
like
this,
that.
But yeah, it's brutal.
I love them, but it's kind of weird.
Anyway, we're hot. That's the point of this.
The thermostat says 80 degrees right now.
So it's a good time. But you know what? We're privileged that we can even complain about this. So
yeah,
count your blessings. All right, what are we going to be talking about today?
Today, we are talking about managing money. And so this is a topic that I'm super passionate about. Background in econ and finance. I love talking about money, finances, personal finance, all of that kind of stuff. I tutored for economics and finance when I was in college.
Just dropping all your credentials now?
I love it. I love talking about personal finances.
I'm also a finance and econ graduate, but...
She's not as passionate about it.
Yeah, I like to spend money.
Yeah, she likes to spend money, and I'm the one telling her not to spend money. But... to start us off, I have a little story because I think it's always fun to start with a little story. So if you haven't heard about David Lee Edwards. So David Lee Edwards, he was a former criminal who had spent nearly a third of his life in prison. However, his luck all changed way back in 2001. The story's a little dated, but...
It is so funny how you tell these because it really sounds like you're reading something, but you're not. You just use these words.
What do you mean?
However, his luck all changed.
What?
It's like...
I don't know. It's just my story.
I know this, but it's just funny because it really sounds like you have a book in front of you.
Pardon the interruption, but David Lee Edwards, his luck changed in 2001 when he won the Kentucky lottery and he won $27 million. And so after he won the lottery, he actually gave this really inspiring speech. He accepted the winnings. He owned up to all the mistakes he had made in the past, but said that winning the lottery was going to allow him to start a brand new life and all of this kind of stuff. It was actually pretty big news in 2001, apparently in Kentucky. But you can imagine in the following years, David went on extravagant trips, bought numerous houses, hosted a lot of parties with illicit drugs, bought a ton of luxury cars. He even bought a private jet. And by 2006, now remember, he won the lottery in 2001, but by 2006, only 5 years later, he was completely broke. Then, fast forward, in 2013, David Lee Edwards, he died in hospice, all alone, completely broke, only 12 years after winning what could have been a life-changing $27 million. And actually, it kind of was life-changing, but not in the way that he expected.
Yikes.
Yeah.
What a happy story. Thank you for sharing that. I hope everyone enjoyed.
Yeah, and that's it. That's our podcast today. So be smarter.
Come back next week for story time with Sibley.
Yeah, story time. Or no, silly stories with Sibley, where Sibley tells a silly story.
Guys.
I love that. I love it.
I had to convince him that we are not doing a segment every single podcast episode called Silly Stories with Sibley, because we used to do this in our small group.
Yeah,
We'd have silly stories
with Sibley, except I would tell like silly personal stories and just make a fool of myself, and I love it, and I think it should be a regular take
seriously
part
anything
of the podcast. So if you think it should be 2, you should spam Zan's email and email Zan telling her that Silly Stories with Sibley should be a regular part of the podcast. But anyway,
I expect to receive 0 emails.
Okay. I expect you will receive at least 5. At least 5. If it gets at least 5, can we make it like a monthly thing?
Sure. I feel like we're doing that. Like, if my teacher gets me 17,000 retweets, we won't have a test or whatever from high school.
But if we can get 5 emails to Zan, which email should they send it to? ZanSibley@gmail, or should they send it?
Thank you for giving my personal email out on the internet.
Okay, sorry.
Zan@thesibleys.co.
Zan@thesibleys.co.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But anyway, moving on. A few sobering thoughts involving money. So, 57% of Americans don't have enough cash to cover an unexpected $500 expense. Of that 57%, 21% would rely on a credit card, 11% would rely on family and friends, 20% would try to cut back on other expenses.
So we'll paint a picture, because I think numbers when you're listening to a podcast can sometimes just go like in one ear out the other.
57%, 57 out of 100 people.
You get your car breaks down, you find out. I know, I'm not saying people don't understand percentages. I'm just saying, okay, so put this in story format. You go to a car place because your brakes are squeaky. They say it's going to be $500. 57% of people would be
struggling. Screwed. Yeah, they'd be screwed. They'd be trying to figure out how to do it.
But they would be like, crap, I can't just give you that cash right now. 21% would put it on a credit card. 11% would ask somebody for help, family or friend for help, and 20% would just charge it and try to cut back on other stuff. All that kind of. Right. Yeah. Anyway, where'd you get that statistic?
I had them I don't have the citations. Okay,
we'll put them in the show notes.
They're legit. Okay.
Guys, promise you. It's from Wikipedia. Yeah,
but
I'm kidding.
Okay. So 45% of U.S. families carry some sort of credit card debt, and the average family has credit card debt of over $6,000. 56% of millennials, so speaking to millennial generation here, don't have any money saved in a retirement account. And 39% of baby boomers and Gen Xers have nothing put away for retirement.
This is where the Sibleys can get really passionate.
Yeah,
when I start talking about retirement.
We're going to be doing that later on in the podcast.
I know. The episode.
This is what blows my mind. Not actually, but it's kind of frightening when you think about it. Only 24% of millennials demonstrate basic financial literacy.
How would you define basic?
So basic financial literacy is understanding how credit cards actually work, how budgeting actually works, and just this idea of just personal finances, understanding how they work. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, okay, I want to just preface all this. It can sound like we're on a high horse and very much shaming or condemning. Yeah. That's not it. This is, I mean, it's that whole joke of like, oh, glad we know the quadratic equation, but we don't know how to pay taxes. It's just like, there's a gap. This could be talked about forever, but like there's a gap in the education. However you got to a place where you don't have basic financial literacy, that what we're discussing is now our responsibility as stewards of money to fill that gap.
Yeah.
Right. This isn't about
this isn't about shaming.
People.
The reason why we wanted to do this podcast is because we are passionate about people utilizing the resources that God has given them to the best of their ability. And part of that is stewarding the money that they have well, but so many people don't even know where to begin. And so
it's
that's
about empowerment and education.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Empowerment and education, not about shame. Right. And so one thing I want to address before we get further into this podcast is
Episode.
I
keep trying to tell them the show is the podcast.
Before we get further into this episode,
there we go.
Is this whole argument about if I made more money. Yes, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, because that's the last stat really quick, is that approximately half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
Meaning they wouldn't have enough to get by if they didn't get that next paycheck.
That next paycheck, exactly. And so then comes the argument, okay, but minimum wage hasn't increased in 30 years or whatever it's been, and
all valid
cost
arguments.
of living, which is all valid arguments. I'm not saying that they're not. And so this idea that, okay, so if I only made more money, then this wouldn't be a problem. The problem is the fact that I don't make money. But I'm here to say that most likely that's not the issue at hand. And so I'm going to have a few more statistics. So 20% of people making more than $100,000 a year live paycheck to paycheck. And so those are obviously people that...
Yeah, that's a good chunk of change. I mean, it obviously depends on where you live. $100,000 makes different.
Yeah, it does. But 20%
But
of
for
people,
anyone, regardless of where you live, that is still a very livable salary.
Yes, exactly. So 20% of people making $100,000 live paycheck to paycheck. Okay, the next one, while it's hard to get a completely accurate picture, anywhere between 35 and 70% of lottery winners go broke and end up filing for bankruptcy, most within 3 to 5 years of winning. And so that story I shared at the beginning, that's actually pretty common for massive lottery winners. Then, if we want to bring sports into it, so I'm a big sports fan.
Yeah.
A 2009 Sports Illustrated report estimated that 78% of NFL players file for bankruptcy or experience financial stress only 2 years after retiring, and that 60% of NBA players suffer the same fate after only 5 years into retirement. And then the National Bureau of Economic Research found in a 2015 study that, again, kind of just reaffirming that a good percentage of NFL players file for bankruptcy within 12 years of retirement. And so this just goes to show is that the minimum salary in these leagues is, you're talking about, I believe in the NBA, the minimum salary is $900,000 a year. And I'm not sure what it is in the NFL, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty similar. It might be 800,000 or something like that. And
that's like the kicker who never plays.
Yeah. But anyway, just those people that make a ton of money, a lot of them are experiencing financial stress only a few years into retirement. And so if you are poor at managing money when you don't have much of it, guess what? You're going to be poor at managing your money when you have a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And so, again, going back to what Zan said, just like with any situation, there are definitely exceptions. Some people truly are in difficult situations due to no fault of their own. If they had, single parent household that they had to take care of, in their teenage years, and they're not able to get out of that situation, and they're continuing to have to help struggling family members. If you have undergone other economic hardships, there's a lot of situations that if you are in financial hardship, a lot of times it can be to no fault of your own. But if you were listening to this podcast, most likely, and again, I'm not saying that isn't the case for some of y'all, but statistically speaking, that is most likely not the case. I
can even think seeing this idea of how you manage a little determines how you manage a lot. Because I've seen people, when we were in the seminary culture, that's a lot of times people not making a whole lot of money, that's like ministry, moms at home with the kid, whatever context, basically people who are living on a way less than $100,000 salary, debt free, really good stewards of their money. And then I've seen people making well over 100,000 or around that area, whatever, making a very livable wage, who have credit card debt, who are just constantly scraping by. And it's just, again, it's not about shaming, but it does show it's not about what that number on your paycheck is. It's about what you're doing with the money.
Yeah. No, I agree. So now let's jump into kind of a few thoughts before we get started from a biblical perspective, how we want to think about money, how we want to talk about money. What does the Bible have to say about this? And so the first thing that I want to address is that when we talk about money, we do have to be extremely careful, because this is one of probably the big three of the most common idols, them being money, sex, and power. And so John Piper book. Yeah, John Piper actually wrote a book called Money, Sex, and Power, but he boils down kind of these these three notoriously big idols that we have in our life. And a lot of things boil down to those three of money, sex, and power.
Yeah, and you see that biblically.
Yes. And so I think it can be very easy to justify the idolatry of money based on the good you can do with it. So you've heard people say that, I want to be rich so that I can help people. And so this might sound like good intentions. Zan and I talk all the time about how we would want to help people if we were, very well off financially.
Or just, not even, if we make it one day, but it's like, wow, we dream of doing this, this, and this.
Yes, exactly. And so, but this idea of I want to be rich so that I can help people. Well, I would challenge them. What are you doing now with your current resources to help others? Because if you aren't helping people now, even in a limited scope, but if you aren't helping people now with your current resources, again, most likely you're not really going to do much with more resources.
Not to take it out of context, cause I am taking it out of context, but the whole idea of the woman who gave her last coin, it was like little, but it's just the idea of how are you sacrificing the little that you do have? Which
we'll talk about a little bit later too.
And I will say, I'll add to that, I kind of run in the entrepreneur subculture.
Entrepreneurial?
Well, I was going to say that word and then I got tripped up, so I said entrepreneur subculture. Entrepreneurial. It's like it hurts my mouth to say the R's in that word. But that's kind of the subculture of the world I run in. And so in business trainings and all kinds of things, like I hear all the time as just this it's supposed to be this empowering charge almost of money in the hands of good people is a good thing and don't have money shame around it. And I'm not saying like you should have shame if you have money and all, whatever, don't read into that. But that whole idea of money in the hands of good people is a good thing can be used as this just justifier for, oh, great, it's a good thing for me to make more money because I'm a good person and I love Jesus and so I'm going to bless everyone with this. And I hear it all the time. And it's like, that would be true if we were inherently good people. Like if we were at our core good people, but if we believe in the gospel and we believe the Bible, we're not. Like we're not inherently good, pure intentioned people. We're inherently sinful people and we're inherently selfish and we're inherently prone to that selfishness regardless. Like, yes, we are made new and that is the whole truth of the gospel. But at the end of the day, having this money, like we are going to be tempted. Like we're going to be tempted to use that money for impure things, whether that impure thing is selfish gain. I'm not saying, again, don't read into that, but I just want to add that because I guarantee people listening to this have heard that idea of money in the hands of good people is a good thing. It's like, great idea if we were good.
Yeah. And so on the flip side of that too, I don't want to hear this and think, okay, so I got to take on this idea of the poverty gospel. And so this is the idea that you have to be poor to be a true believer because, Jesus and the rich young ruler, he challenged him to give away everything that he owned in order to be, a follower of him. And so I think a lot of people take this to the extreme and they say, okay, well, if money is so dangerous, if money is, can be tempting and all this kind of stuff, I need to not have any money, and in order to be a true follower of Jesus, I have to be poor.
Yeah, or it's like sinful to have nice things.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is just legalism. That's not true.
And so again, you take this the story of the rich young ruler in Mark 10, where he comes up to Jesus and he says, teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus tells him, to observe the commandments. And he says, I've done those. What more must I do? And Jesus says, there's one thing that you lack. You need to go and sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. And he went away dejectedly because he was very wealthy and he wouldn't do that. And so, a lot of people can take that to mean
that's what we all have to do.
That's what we all have to do. But if you notice, Jesus gave that command specifically to him and not to others, because Jesus calls both poor people and rich people to repent and believe the gospel. Both Zacchaeus and Lydia are two examples of people that were very well off financially, that were commended for their faith. And again, Zacchaeus, gave away a good chunk of what he had, but he was very wealthy even after he gave a good chunk of what he had away. And same goes to Lydia. She was very well off. And so these are people that were commended for their faith. And so, yeah, I don't think we have to say that, oh, we have to be impoverished to be a true follower of Jesus Christ. And so you got to find that middle line there.
It all goes back to the heart, as it always does.
Yes. Okay, so another thought from a biblical perspective. 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Not
root. The.
Yes, it's a root of all kinds of different evil. So you can be rich or poor and still fall into this idea of loving money. Although, ironically, I do find it's often more so than not, rich people saying this as a justification for why their wealth is okay. You know, that they'll say like, oh yeah, the love of money, it's not having money, it's the love of money. And, you know, I just happen to be super rich and it's okay because I don't love it. So it's all right. And so I just find people saying that are more often well off than not. But it is true where, you know, both rich people and poor people can fall into this idea of money.
Sometimes even if you don't have money, if you love of money can be fleshed out very differently. If it's a like constant drive for security, that's a love of money.
Yeah.
That's an idolization of money. You don't have to have a ton of it in your bank account to have this love of money, you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I love John Piper. He wrote about this idea of what Paul meant here. He said that Paul meant that all the evils in the world come from a certain kind of heart, namely the kind of heart that loves money. The heart that loves money is a heart that pins its hope and pursues its pleasures and puts its trust in what human resources can offer. So the love of money is virtually the same as faith in money. Belief, trust, confidence, assurance that money will meet your needs and make you happy. And so that idea of if you are putting your faith, your belief, your trust, your confidence in money or in just this security of your possessions, that's wrong, whether you're rich or poor. Mm-hmm. Another thing I think this needs to be said is that in this era of prosperity gospel that I think we're kind of hopefully coming out of, but still needs to be said, God does not desire all of his children to be rich. This needs to be said because of the Joel Osteens of the world that claim that God desires you to be prosperous, that God desires you to be well off financially.
But Jeremiah 29:11, Nathaniel.
Okay, but some of the most faithful believers throughout history have been poor. Jesus and his apostles, they worked with their hands and were not wealthy. Jesus talks more about the danger of money than the benefit of it. And so going back to what Zan was saying about the money in the hands of good people is a good thing. Jesus talked more about the dangers of money than the benefits of it. And then obviously, you know, Matthew 6:19 through 31. And so this is that whole section on do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where thieves break in, where rust destroys and all that kind of stuff. And in it says you cannot serve God and money. And that's a very convicting line. That's a very convicting sentence. And I think we need to do well to analyze in our own lives if we're trying to serve God and money. And so, and the last thing is, if you are listening to this podcast, you are wealthier than 99% of people throughout the history of this world. I know there's always going to be people that are wealthier than you, but you think about the history of the world and how we currently, even some of the, you know, lower middle class and even, you know, upper lower class and all of that, they live better now than what kings and queens lived like 200 years ago. And so, or 300 years ago, whatever. But I think it needs to be said that we need to realize that in a lot of the passages where the Bible is talking about the rich of this world, we are the rich of this world.
Yeah. I feel like this can sound like a lot of doom and gloom of basically we're just sitting here, I mean, almost like villainizing money, but that's not it. Like
no.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's a good place to start to just have kind of this.
I think it's good to prepare your heart and to really evaluate your heart. And that's why we're starting.
Because
here.
we are also passionate about people being successful in their careers and doing their careers well. And that's going to warrant you making money. Like it is good. I'm not saying, I just want to go back to that. Like the money in the hands of good people is a good thing. Like I'm not just completely negating that, saying like it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I'm just want to put that caveat that we aren't entirely good. So we have to be aware of this. This is more about awareness and bringing these things to the forefront of our mind before we go into more practical managing and stewarding.
Yeah. And then the last thing I want to address, just because it's a common myth out there that I hear, this idea that Jesus talked more about money than anything else in his ministry. That's not true. He did talk about money a lot, but Jesus talked more about the kingdom of heaven than anything else, and the kingdom of heaven being near and everything like that. And so just the kingdom of heaven and how he was the way to heaven. That's what he talked about the most, not money, but he did talk about money a lot. Okay, so we see this idea of, we shouldn't love money. We shouldn't put our faith, our hope, our trust, or anything like that in money. So how do we fight against this love of money? Before we're going to get into this practicality of, how do we manage our money well and budgeting and all that kind of stuff. But before we get there, how do we fight against this love of money? Where do we start with, Zan?
I would say starting biblically, tithing regularly. We see that in the Bible, giving 10% of your income to your local church. I think there always gets to be like lots of questions of, can I just give 10% away to charity? All of these things. That's maybe a breakdown for another day, but I would say 10% to your local church. And yeah, that was a commandment in both the Old Testament, and we see that was a upheld expectation in the New Testament as well. Yeah,
not a legalistic command to be saved sort of deal, right. But it was an expectation.
It was an expectation of that culture of believers.
Yeah. I think giving from your wealth is one of the best ways to fight against the love of it. And so just giving money away.
But what about if you're a broke college student and 10%, you might not even have enough for your next meal?
I've heard this a lot working with college student, and I would just, I point them to the story of the poor widow in Mark 12, where the poor widow, she's commended for giving 2 copper coins. Everyone is giving bags of money, and Jesus points to her and says to his disciples that, she has given more than anyone else because she gave out of her she gave out of her poverty, and they were all giving out of their wealth, and it didn't hurt them to give, but she gave all that she had. And so I think I go back to this idea of the habits and practices you make while you're young, they're going to stick with you. And so even if you don't think you can give 10%, and I challenge you to evaluate why not, but even if you can't give 10%, give something. Get in the habit of giving money, of tithing.
And get in the habit of it hurting a little bit.
Yes, sacrificial.
It needs to dent your budget.
Yes, and that's the next point. So the next way to fight against the love of money is give generously beyond your tithe. And there should be people that are financially blessed by you that only you and them know about. It's okay if literally nobody else knows about. Matthew 6:3 and 4, when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. There should be people that are financially blessed by you that no one else has any clue what you did for them. And that is okay. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah.
The next thing I would say, so you see tithe regularly, give generously beyond your tithe.
This is on the fly, but I have a question. Would you, I think we've talked about this before, but is it wrong to be like, I want to give because that whole idea, your Father who sees in secret will reward you? That idea of giving so that you will have eternal blessings? So for some context, this is me talking now, not to Nathaniel, but to the podcast audience. I have thought through this before, of this idea of almost this like spiritual prosperity gospel. Like, am I doing things for a spiritual prosperity, like an eternal prosperity? And this is probably a super nuanced conversation, but like, no, I'm not doing, and I'm not saying I'm doing these things either, but like this idea of, would it be proper motivation to do things for blessings eternally if you're not doing things for worldly blessings? That's probably a pretty theological nuanced.
It's very nuanced and everything. I would say, and again, this is without having done a ton of research into it and Zan asking on the fly.
Yeah, sorry for that.
I think that you have to be extremely careful with that, but that it's not necessarily inherently wrong, if that makes sense. I mean, in 1 Corinthians 3, where God talks about Paul talks about no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. And then he goes into this idea of you can build upon this foundation with, I believe he uses the examples of gold, silver, precious metals, or you can build on it with wood, hay, or straw. And he says, quote, everyone's work will be manifest in the day of judgment. And those who built with gold, precious metals, silver, their work will be tested and revealed. Those who built with wood, hay, straw, their work will be burned up, and they will be saved, but only through trial. And so this idea of our lives, there are believers who have a foundation of Christ who build poorly. They don't utilize their lives for the sake of the gospel and aren't sold out for the gospel. And they're going to be saved, but they're not going to receive the same. I don't want to use reward. I love how John Piper uses it. John Piper, again, I've been quoting him a lot today, but I believe I remember reading an article, but yeah. He talked about this idea of we don't receive different rewards in heaven, but we have different size cups. So everyone's cup will be he uses this analogy of a cup, and everyone's cup will be completely full. And so you think of something like a shot glass of, I have this little shot glass and that cup is going to be completely full. And then someone else who has a keg. I don't know why I went with the alcohol analogies, but someone who has a keg that's completely full. And so both are completely full. Both are experiencing the fullness of God for what they have, but this fullness is experienced differently for each of them. So I think I really love that idea of, there is a different kind of, not necessarily different reward, but a different fullness for how we live our lives on this earth. So going back to your question, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to pursue, I want to live my life in a way that glorifies God, so that, we hear it all the time, so that I get to the end of my life and I hear this, well done, good and faithful servant, but so that I can receive these heavenly blessings. But I want to be careful of, that should not be my primary way of working. Wrong. Yeah, I don't think that should be what I'm primarily working out of. I think it should be primarily working out of a joy of the gospel, of what God has done for me on the cross, the God who created me, who I rebelled against, loved me before I loved him, and he loved me enough to send his son to live the perfect life I couldn't live, to die the death that I deserved, to rise from the dead, so that if I believe in him and turn from my sin, that I will have eternity with him. Like, that is a weighty message that should be what we're working from. And so I don't think we're trying to earn heavenly blessings, but we should rather be I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but I do think we should primarily be working out of this love for God because of what the gospel is.
All right.
Okay, so that was a long tangent, but we've had 3. How to fight against the love of money. Tithe regularly, give generously beyond your tithe. Oh, no, we just do those 2. The third one is, Zan alluded to this, but give sacrificially. Your giving should hurt a little bit. So if Bill Gates, if he gave away $1 to a charity, is he being generous? I think all of us would say no. But if a homeless person gave $1 to charity, is he being generous? I think so. And so this goes back to the story of the poor widow that we talked about earlier in Mark 12. And so a year ago, I hesitate to say this because I truly don't want it to sound like we're bragging or boastful in any way, but I do want to use it as an example. And so I wrestled to give this example, but I do want to give it. You can check me on it, hear my heart. I hope it's not coming out of the wrong heart. But a year ago, our giving to our church was more than what we had combined in our checking and savings. So like everything that we had saved up, we gave more to our church over the course of the year than what we had saved up at the end of the year. And that was just what we had total, not like, oh, we saved money throughout the year, but we gave more than what we'd saved. No, like
it's
what
just like
we
when
had,
we got our statement for our taxes, it was more than we had combined.
Yeah.
Like our
and
giving statement.
I guess to confess sin, I guess, is that after receiving that statement showing that we had given more than what we had saved up, it became a lot harder to tithe over the next couple of months, where I was like, man, that was a lot of money that we gave. If we could have kept that, we could have done a lot.
You start playing that game.
You start playing that game. So I almost wish we wouldn't have had that statement.
Money in the hands of good people, but we're not.
Yeah, exactly. And so we definitely felt our giving, and this will not always be the case. We're not always going to give more than what we have in our savings, and I guarantee that won't be the case this year, because we sold our house this year and we're not buying a new house right away, and so we're not going to end up giving more than what we have end up saved up. But
this feels I think oddly vulnerable to talk about
where we happen to be at that season of life, that's where we were. But we should give sacrificially. We should feel we should feel it when we give. So that's the top 3: tithe regularly, give generously, give sacrificially. Have people hold you accountable is the 4th. And so there are some people who anytime, I think this was JP, right? Yeah. JP talked about Jonathan Pokluda. He talked about that anytime they make a purchase over $500, they have to run it by their small group first. And so they have to ask their small group, and their small group can ask them, they can check them, all that kind of stuff. But we don't do that, but I think it's good to have people in general holding you accountable. And so ask others who are willing to call it as it is. If you are lusting after money, you need to be able to have honest conversations where people feel comfortable approaching you and calling out your sin if you are idolizing money. And so have people that hold you accountable. And then I think the last thing, and this is maybe the toughest, is you need to ask yourself genuinely and spend time wrestling with the question, if Jesus asked me to do what he asked the young rich ruler to do, would I be willing to do it? And I think this is where I wrestle with all the time. If Jesus had asked me to do that, would I be willing to sell everything, give it to the poor, and go to a third world country and preach the gospel for the rest of my life?
I think that can be glorified in the Christian culture sometimes, this idea of that. But then put your actual possessions and your actual lifestyle and your coffee shop that you like and all the things just random, make it personal, and it's going to stay.
It hits differently.
Yeah, it hits differently.
And I think, it's tough, and you need to wrestle with that question. You need to ask it. I wrestle with that, not as much as I should, but I wrestle with that often. So, yeah.
So those are practical ways to fight that love of money. Moving on. Where are we going next with this?
So that's the spiritual realm, but everything, the spiritual realm envelops everything, right?
Everything's spiritual.
Yeah. But beyond that, so what are some practical topics that need to be addressed when talking about money? And so we're going to talk about budgeting. We're going to talk about credit card and other debt. We're going to talk more in depth about credit cards. We're going to talk about retirement. We're going to talk about how much money before getting married. And then we're going to talk about the 1 degree shift. So stick with us.
It's so funny because these are conversations we have pretty much every day in our life. This is like such a common chat. I feel like y'all are really just getting a glimpse into our life right now.
No, for sure. And it's funny because all the people that I worked with, they were always asking me, when are you doing the money podcast episode? When are you doing the money episode? And all that kind of stuff. But I love, even beyond just me and Zan, this was, I love talking about just financial things. Yeah. But, okay. So let's dive into budgeting. So
sorry, I didn't know if that was like you trying to segue to me. Your first step towards fiscal responsibility, being a good steward of your money, is going to know where you are spending your money, having an awareness of where every dollar.
Yes.
Kidding. Dave Ramsey's program's called that if you don't understand.
I think it is true where most people, when they first start budgeting, they're shocked by how much money they spend and where they spend their money.
I mean, even with... I mean, I just jokingly plugged Ramsey, but I know that even in his programs or like any budgeting you do, any budgeting program, it's going to say to spend a few months figuring out, gauging your things. And the reason for that is because people usually are coming in so unaware. So it does take you a few months to figure out where every category should be.
So since you brought up Dave Ramsey, I will say Every Dollar is the budgeting app by Dave Ramsey, and I really, really love it. Now, I will say Ramsey as a whole, I really like him. I think he's got some really good tools, some really good resources, but I would be cautious of treating everything he says as gospel. In my own personal opinion, I think some of what he says is a little bit outdated. Plus, I will say there you do get that little vibe from him, that almost this idea that Jesus desires all of his followers to be upper middle class.
There's for sure an underlying American gospel of like we should.
And I do want to be careful. We don't know his heart or anything. I think he's great. He has great resources, great tools. I think he as a person is super solid. But I just be careful. Don't treat everything he says as gospel.
This wasn't supposed to be this hot take. It's just to say that I see people like really glorifying, and it's like he's still just a human being. Yeah. And his ways are just still one method, and there's plenty of ways to budget. So anyway, going on, some helpful budgeting strategies. Yeah. Again, take these with grains of salt. And
this is from Ramsey. Like I said, he's got really good stuff. And so these budgeting strategies, he's got like these 5 steps that you start with for making a budget. So first of all, obviously, and this is before we get into, I think he says it too, but even for us, us, knowing your why is going to help you stay consistent. So what are you trying to do? Are you trying to save? Are you trying to get out of debt? Are you trying to see where your expenses are coming from? What are you trying to do? And everything like that. And then another principle that you should know, but some people don't. Obviously, you cannot spend more money than what you make.
Well, you can because credit cards, but you should not.
You should not, unless you're in retirement and you have a huge nest egg saved up or whatever. But you should not spend more than what you make.
Is that what it's called? A nest egg?
Yeah, a nest egg.
Interesting.
A nest egg. Yep. Interesting. So this is from Ramsey. Number 1, the first thing you want to do is list your income. So take all of your income that you make periodically throughout a month. If your income kind of fluctuates, take either your average or your lowest month's income and start from there, because you can always adjust. Like Zan said,
entrepreneur world.
Who knows? You usually want to give yourself 4 months to figure out the budgeting, and then you're good to go. And so that's number 1, list your income. Number 2, list your expenses. And so, like I said, with income, if your income is variable, start with your lowest projected income. You can start with your average, but I start with your lowest. You can always add more later if you make more.
Yeah.
For expenses, you want to start with your necessities. Start with your housing, your food, your utilities, your transportation. These are things that no matter what, you will have to pay for. And again,
your routine bills.
Yeah, your routine bills. I would include tithe under necessity, going back to what we were saying earlier.
That whole idea, you don't want your tithe to be one of your last budget items. You want it to be your first. You want it you want to get it out.
Cain and Abel, first fruits. Come on.
But truly, I mean, practically, you want to get it out of your hands before you have any temptation to start allocating it differently.
Yep. Okay. A little snippet, side note. The cost of your rent, mortgage, housing, all that, it should be no more than 35% of what you make. And so if you have an opportunity to take on a mortgage, but it's going to be 45% of your take-home pay, you probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's where we see people getting very house poor.
Yes, exactly. So some other side notes, some expenses are fixed. They stay the same. Other expenses are variable, so stay the same. Your phone bill is going to stay the same, but your gas, your food, all of that's going to be variable by month. So you're going to have your necessities, which we just talked about. After you have your necessities, add in your non-essentials, things like eating out, entertainment, all of that kind of stuff. Then you also want to add in a miscellaneous line. This is for unexpected expenses. I got to get an oil change. I've got to
replace your brakes,
whatever it is. But I would suggest at least 10%.
Or like an urgent care visit, like things that hurt because you weren't planning for them.
I would suggest at least 10% if possible for
10% of your overall income.
Of your overall income for that month for miscellaneous. And then lastly, I would try to save at least 10% of your income towards retirement, which we'll talk about in a sec, or whatever, towards an emergency fund, build up that emergency fund, whatever you need to do, but save 10%. So if you've done the math and you've been keeping up with us, if 10% tithe, 35% housing, 10% miscellaneous, 10% save, we're already at 65%. And so just be aware, and you got to budget wisely. It does go fast. And I would say, really, if you're trying to make a budget, start by limiting the coffees, limiting the entertainment.
I was going to say that 10% being your non-essentials is very conservative based on, or like compared to the average American.
10% was miscellaneous. I didn't budget the non-essentials.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, those non-essentials, people are very tempted to make those a big percentage.
Yes.
When you think about how much shopping and coffee and eating out and all of those.
Yeah, they add up quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the first two. Take into account, track your income, track your expenses. So, number 3, after taking into account income and expenses, subtract expenses from income. If you end up with a negative amount, you take your income minus your expenses, but then you end up with a negative amount, that means you have too much expenses. If your expenses are bigger than your income, you need to cut some expenses, or you need to make more money. But you should probably start with cutting your expenses.
That's the tempting thing, is you always say, I'll just make more money. But
cut some expenses.
See beginning of episode.
If you end up with a positive amount, yay! Decide what you want to do with that money. Do I want to save it? Do I want to put it in the emergency fund? Do I want to put it in retirement, college fund for kid?
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Go on vacation.
Yeah, whatever.
I was kind of kidding about that.
But anyway, so I actually really do like this from Ramsey, but he says you should always end at 0. Decide what you're going to do with every dollar. So save it, spend it, invest it. What are you going to do?
Yeah, his whole principle is have every dollar allocated, there's the word, in advance.
Yes.
Because otherwise it'll be very easy to be like, oh my gosh, we have an extra $300 this month. Like, let's go do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. No, that's good. And then number 4, keep track of your expenses throughout the month. So you can do this by hand or a paid app. We pay $10 for Ramsey Solutions to do that every dollar app. I do recommend using a paid app. We used to do where we kept track of all of our expenses, but if you keep track of all of your expenses, it's really tempting. First of all, you have to be on top of your stuff. You have to do it every single day.
I mean, when you think about how many random expenses you have a day.
But it's possible. Right. But then also, for me, what I found is it's really tempting not to include stuff like that trip to the vending machine or that gas station purchase or something like that, where those small little expenses, that $2 expense, that $5 expense, that doesn't even matter. I don't need to include it. Well, when you have a paid app that keeps track of all your expenses, it forces you to do that.
And I know there's others. There's like mint.com. I think we used that when we first got married. It doesn't matter which app. But I will say as well, so we did have mint.com and then we switched, or whatever it is, the Mint app. Minted was our wedding invitations. Whatever. I think it's called Mint. And then we also had Every Dollar. Every Dollar requires, even the paid version, the paid version gets you, this is not at all sponsored. It sounds like we're really promoting Ramsey here, but no. It does get your bank account hooked up. So basically every expense that comes through our account automatically shows up. You don't have to go in and manually type them in, but you do still have to manually drag them, which people could be like, that is so much work. But the whole idea is that psychological, when you have to drag your $2.99 vending machine to that category, you're like, oh, wow. Versus Mint, I know for us, it did, pre-allocated. And so it would just distribute. And then it's almost like the idea of cash. You have to think about the fact that you're giving it over versus just swiping a card. Yeah. So it has that extra psychological check of like, wow, I just spent that, So I would advise for that, basically, you having to manually allocate your dollars. Yeah, which is actually really funny. That's a little side note. So most people, they suggest if you have trouble spending money, take out cash and only pay stuff when you go shopping with cash. I think that's a Ramsey, his envelope thing. But yeah, his envelope thing. But also other people say that too, other financial things. For me, when I have cash, it's a lot easier for me to spend it than it is to swipe that credit card. I don't know if something's wrong with me, like reverse psychological. But I know plenty of people like that. It's like almost like there's no paper trail of it because it doesn't show up in your bank account showing. It's like, oh, this is free money. Like no one knows what happened to this money. But you gotta, whatever's harder for you to spend, whether it's harder for you to spend cash or harder for you to spend on a credit card, I would recommend that should be your primary method of how you spend money. Yeah, Nathaniel and I, when we get cash out, we just don't carry cash. I feel like most people our age would probably say that, but when we get cash to for tolls or whatever it is and we have it left over, that's when we're tempted to go out to eat or something because we're like, oh yeah, here we have cash in our wallet. Yep. Anyway, next,
Okay, so
make a new budget.
Before the end of the month. The 5th step, make a new budget before next month. And
So
do it
before
again.
you start spending that money, have it pre-allocated.
Yeah. Well, it's just saying before you get to the end of this month, before next month starts, have your budget for it started. That's what it means.
Right.
But
Yeah. So
Okay. So again, like we've been saying, give it at least 4 months before you can get the hang of it and everything like that. One quick side question before we get into it, before we move on, is I've heard this idea of what do you do with the big expenses that once a year that doesn't fit neatly into your budget? So maybe you have a big car expense, you got to renew your plates. And in North Carolina, it was so annoying because it costs so much money.
Gosh,
if you want to go on vacation, all that kind of stuff. My big thing is to save in advance. So we have Smarty Pig, where every month we take out money. It sounds like a scam. It kind of looks like, but it's a Smarty Pig. And what it is, it's a free online piggy bank that's federally backed by Sallie Mae with decently high interest rates. And it looks sketch, but it's totally legit.
it's like also similar to Capital with a Q that I had. It's basically just where your money is physically taken out of your bank account. Because I know a lot of bank accounts, you can kind of sort your expenses, but they're all in one pot. You have digitally separate piggy banks based on what you're saving for.
And so every month, automatically withdrawn. We had $200 automatically withdrawn for retirement. We had $100 automatically withdrawn for random car payments and car expenses. We had $50 automatically withdrawn for vacation. We had $75 automatically withdrawn for bathroom renovations. We had, I think $100 automatically withdrawn for emergency fund. And again, it takes, 4, 5, 6 months to build up a good base. But once you have that built up, it's really helpful to have. So what we did is while it was building up the first 4, 5, 6 months, we didn't take any money out of it. If we had big expenses that we had during that time that would have fallen under the car fund or something like that, we're like, okay, we have to dip into our savings or something like that. But allow it time to build up. But that was really helpful because then when I had to go renew my plates and it was $200, oh boom, I already have this more than enough saved up. And then I had to get an oil change for, oil change and tire rotation, and then something else came up with my car and it was $250. Well, I had $800 saved away at that point in my car fund. So it was really easy to renew my plates and get everything with the car taken care of. Yeah,
that's just basically the whole point of this is no, those aren't going to be those routine budget items on each month, but this is a way for you to have one because you are having a routine $100 taken out. It won't cover everything you need, but it's going through. Another way that you could use this is if you're saving for more consumer goods, because I know those were kind of boring examples, but say you want an espresso maker, or say you want
a couch.
Yes, there's a big thing that you're saving up for. This is how you can practically take each month, because you're not going to set aside, you're likely not going to have an extra $600 one month to budget for something. Like, you don't have that much flex room in your normal budgeting, but you could do $100 for 6 months and actually have it physically being taken out.
Or
and
even $50 for a year.
Right. That's feasible. Whatever it looks like for you. The numbers of this don't matter. Yeah. But, and you're putting it into something that has some interest rate too. Yep. So it's not just sitting, because I know that would be a common thing that people would kind of come back with. So, all right, getting into some credit cards and
other debt, student loan, mortgage, car, etc. Outside of your mortgage and outside of, in some cases, a car loan, it is vital that you eliminate all of your debt as quickly as you can. And so interest rates, and they're just going up right now. Interest rates are going to cause your balance to balloon, and pretty soon you can find yourself owing more than your original balance. And so have a budget line for paying off debt and make sure you're doing everything in your power to pay off debts quickly. A lot of credit cards have interest rates higher than 20%, and if you just pay the minimum each month, it is only going to grow. You're never going to actually pay it off. And so make sure that you are paying off debt.
And the thing I'll say about that is credit card companies,
hold on, we're going to get into credit cards in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just saying that they're obviously trying to make it appealing for you to not pay that off.
Yes. And so, but yeah, the first step towards financial freedom is eliminating bad debt. So do everything in your power to eliminate credit card debt as quickly as possible. Don't eat out, cut cable, be disciplined, don't go to entertainment, eliminate your credit card debt. Same thing, it goes maybe not to that extreme, but pretty extreme with with your student loans, eliminate your student loans. Obviously your mortgage, it's okay to have a mortgage. It's all right to have a car loan, but I would say try to avoid a car loan as much as possible. Buy used cars. We've been at only one car for the past
year?
2 years.
No. It was right after Verity was born.
Okay, so we've been at one car for a year now, saving up for a second car because we don't want to take out a car loan.
Because my car needed like more than it was worth in repairs, and we were like, this would be silly.
Yeah.
But we're also not just going to turn around and pick up a car payment when we can sacrifice.
Exactly. And so when you have a car loan, you're paying the car loan plus you're paying insurance. It's just a lot all at once. So again, I know some people, they have to have that to have a single car, so that's okay. But try to do your best. Again, you don't need a new car. You don't need the newest model. And I know right now used car prices are absurd right now. And so that's another reason why we're waiting. We're waiting for used car prices to come down because typically one of the biggest crazy scams is new cars because as soon as you drive it off the lot, it loses 10% of its value.
Lemon law.
And so if you buy a car that's 2 years old and get it at a 25% discount from when it's new, but you can buy a car 5-6 years old, but
maybe slightly off. No, it's pretty much on topic, but I'm in a book I'm reading right now. It's talking about how there are people driving Toyotas and Hondas who have just drastically more money in the bank than somebody driving a Mercedes or a Porsche.
Yes.
Because it's so tempting to think that your financial, just these status symbols. And it's just like, sometimes the wealthiest people are just those people that are humbly stewarding their money.
That drive that old pickup truck. I didn't even think to mention it because I feel like most of our listeners aren't in that state. But if I
think that millennial it can be tempting to put your money in the house, put your money in the car, put your money in the things people see, and it's just so silly.
It's just so silly. Like, I know someone who's a landscaper. He's one of my dad's friends that on the outside, he drives this old beat up pickup truck. He's got a modest house and everything like that. But he let it slip to my dad one day that he has, I think, more than $2 million in his bank account in the stock market and investments and stuff like that. But here's someone you would never expect, but he's been working hard his whole life. He's been spending money properly, and he's set up for the rest of his life.
But then there are people in 5-bedroom homes with a new car and $20,000 in credit card debt.
Yes,
and
exactly.
it's just like, which would you rather be? Again, it's not about shame, but it's about this. It can be so tempting to have X, Y, and Z, but at the end of the day, anyway.
So going into that debt, your goal should be to have no debt outside of a mortgage, and then even then to pay off your mortgage as quickly as possible. Be vigorous in your goal of eliminating debt. Not only does this affect your financial health, but it affects your mental health as well.
Oh, for sure. That's like one of the biggest, that's why we see it's the biggest cause of divorce. One of the biggest causes of divorce. It affects everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so side note on credit cards. You need to judge for yourself how responsible you are if you want to have a credit card, because credit cards are extremely dangerous. And some people like Ramsey, they suggest that you just avoid them at all costs. You never have a credit card. But we just, for transparency, we each have a credit card because if you're responsible with them, you can actually benefit from the lack of fiscal responsibility of others. Nice. How credit cards work, it's true. Yeah. How they work is when you put an expense on a credit card, you have between a month and 2 months to pay it off before it starts accruing interest. If you pay it off before then, great, you're all set. If not, you're stuck paying between interest rates of 20% or more. And again, right now, those interest rates are just going higher and your balance is going to go higher and it's going to balloon. And Zan was alluding to, what were you going to say earlier about credit cards? They don't make it easy. You remember?
Oh, yeah. The business of a credit card is they're going to show you that they're really going to emphasize. Full transparency, have never actually paid our credit card. Nathaniel handles logging into that account, so I don't know what it looks like. But I know.
It's easy to just pay the minimum.
It's really tempting to just pay that minimum balance. That's what they advertise. They're not saying like, here, pay this off or else you're going to start accruing interest, because they make money by you accruing interest.
Technically, it gives like an option of you can either put in, when I pay it off, you can like type in an amount, you can pay the current balance, or you can pay the minimum, but whatever. But anyway, so you might be thinking, why have a card? Because there are some benefits of having one. A lot of them offer cash back for every purchase made. And so we've been able to pay for vacations with our credit card rewards, and everything like that. Like right now, we have
Our goal is to pay for Hawaii.
So we have $800 in credit card rewards right now, and we said over the next 3-4 years we're saving those up, and we're going to try to pay for a Hawaii trip like 3-4 years down the road, or at least a huge chunk of it. And so, you know, we've been able to pay for our smaller vacations in the past with these rewards, and now that we really want to do a big one, we're gonna have to save up longer.
But yeah, the key to that is treating your credit card as if it's a debit card.
Yes. So as soon as we put an expense on the credit card, I pay it off at least once a week, if not more. And so as soon as it clears, I'm paying it off.
Right.
And as soon as it
and you
goes
don't want to have this mentality of I'm putting this on the credit card, and when I get my paycheck, I'll pay it off.
Exactly.
You want that money in your bank right
Do
then.
not put any expenses on your credit card if you don't have the money to pay for it immediately. So this allows us to build up rewards without accruing interest. But again, if you're worried, the rewards are not worth the risk. So be honest with yourself about how responsible you are. And if you have any concern at all, again, I've just grown up. I've grown up with it, so I'm used to it. And so I want to take advantage of what's out there. But again, if you have any hesitancy at all, I would just affirm what Ramsey says and just avoid credit cards.
And this is a side tangent, so cut me off if we want to. But you said you grew up with this, and I think this is a whole nother topic that we could go into in a whole nother episode. But you grew up in a home that money was very openly talked about, I feel like. And I feel like that helped you a lot. You went into things a lot more aware. And I think as we talk about this all the time, like it's so weird in our society to talk about money and to put numbers. Like even this episode may feel cringe to some people of like, why are you giving numbers to your personal finances and stuff like that? But we just, I don't know if I'd say we're passionate. I think we are about not having it be weird. Like that's where people get into trouble, is where it's weird to talk about your money and to ask for financial wisdom and to ask for like practical thing, you know?
Yeah.
It's seen as so taboo, and I think that we would all be in a better place if it weren't. Like it really is just a neutral tool. So why don't we talk about it as if it is?
Yeah. No, I agree. So now let's really quickly talk about retirement. I'm not going to talk about employer kind of like if you're an employee, like retirement matching, but I will say this really quick. We're not going to get into it. But if you have employer matching, you know, up to 3%, 6%, whatever it is, do it. Like if your employer is going to match your contributions to your retirement, that's just free money. And so do all that you can to take advantage of all of those employer retirement benefits.
I don't know about that life.
Yeah.
Never had that.
But okay, so now let's talk about personal retirement accounts. The reason why I talk about retirement is because so many people I talk to my age, they have no retirement savings and they have no plans for retirement. And it's just like, what? This is just crazy. And so
I remember us even talking about this in college with like our college friends.
Yes. I started my retirement account when I was 18 years old. And
not to say that you're just like, again,
no,
this is because you were raised in
a house
was talked about.
Yeah, exactly. It's because my parents sat me down and they were like, start a retirement account, contribute to it every year.
Yeah. It's not a glamorous thing for an 18-year-old usually, but okay. Anyway.
So there's two types of IRAs that I want to talk about, a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA. So both are retirement accounts. A Roth IRA is taxed when you put money into it. So you have to, you know, basically any money you put into it, you have to declare that on your taxes and you get taxed like it's kind of income. But it's not taxed when you take money out of it. So when you get to retirement and you're taking money out, it's not taxed. A traditional IRA is not taxed when you put money into it, but it is taxed when you take money out of it. And so a Roth IRA, the most you can put out for both of them, the most you can put into it is $6,000 a year if you're under the age of 50 and $7,000 a year if you're over the age of 50. One thing that, again, most of our listeners, it's not going to apply to you. Some of y'all, it will. But if you make more than $144,000 a year individually, or if you make more than $214,000 a year married filing jointly, you cannot contribute to a Roth IRA. You can only contribute to a traditional IRA.
Yeah. But to make this simple, you want to start with contributing to a Roth IRA because of that.
A Roth IRA, because it's not taxed when you take money out of it, and also you're most likely if you're listening, your income tax bracket is going to be a little bit lower, but it's going to grow as you get older. And so you want to put as much money in as now and get not as much tax taken out.
Right.
And so a Roth IRA is what we suggest for the vast majority of our listeners. Go with a Roth IRA. You're not all that kind of stuff. The biggest thing is to start as early as you can. Because
that's the name of the game.
What you make is compounded over time. So this idea of interest, I won't get into the numbers, but like essentially it's like you make money and then the money you made makes money and it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and kind of just like 1 degree in the short term, it doesn't make a huge deal, but long term it does.
Yeah, I mean, just go back to your like algebra 2 exponential
it's exponential.
Equations. Yeah.
Play the long game. The difference of starting at age 25 versus 35 is the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you're 65 years old. With the same
exact amount monthly contribution.
Yes,
that's exactly. The thing. It's not about, because when you're 35, you're contributing more. If you put in $100 a month every month, starting at 25 versus 35, that compounds to hundreds of thousands of dollars difference. Exactly. Because of that exponential influence. So, yeah.
So if you're older and haven't started yet, don't fret. Starting today is better than starting tomorrow. So start now. Don't worry about what you missed out on, because you can always start today. One of the most financially responsible people that I know that I worked with, he didn't start his retirement in his account until he was in his 30s because he just didn't know, but he's been so financially wise and he's more than made up for it since then because of how he's been since then. So don't think it's too late. You can start today. And even if you can't put in that full $6,000 a year, put in $500 a year, $1,000 a year. It's all going to add up.
And here's a practical little nugget. Something that we do, if we get Christmas money, it can be so tempting for Christmas money. Yeah. This is just an example. It doesn't have to be a hard and fast rule. But our rule for ourselves is that money goes into our investments, because that can be really tempting to be like, fun spending money. Yeah. But it hurts a lot less to put that money that we weren't necessarily expecting, and that's not our income money, into this compounding versus, having those budget items. I'm getting so worked up right now. This is one of the biggest thing I try to impress upon people my age. Most people I know, like I said, that are my age haven't even thought about starting a retirement account, but start one now. Start one today. So where do you start? What we use is Vanguard. And it's not just what we use. There's this book called The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. He highly recommends Vanguard as well. Vanguard was founded in 1975 by Jack Bogle, and he believed that a mutual fund company should not have outside owners. So instead, shareholders of Vanguard Group own the company's different funds. So the shareholders are the actual owners of Vanguard. So because of this idea, it doesn't have outside shareholders to please. Vanguard is only worried about satisfying its customers. So I got to reach out to them for some sponsorship money. This is a lot of financial lingo, whatever. I won't get into it. The average person's probably confused right now and like, what the heck? Basically what it means is a lot of companies, they have outside shareholders. So they're trying to please both their customers and outside shareholders, but a lot of times shareholders are the puppeteers. But anyway, so to please both is really difficult. But Vanguard doesn't have to worry about that problem because they're just trying to make their customers as much money as they can, because when their customers make more money, they make more money. And when their customers make more money, they talk about it on their podcast for free. But anyway, so yes, start early. Start with There's a lot. You don't have to use Vanguard. That's what we use. Just search a Roth IRA. Yeah. Just literally Google that. I'm sure plenty of people will have some sponsored things to get you to put your money in there. Yes, exactly. But just start a Roth IRA. Start saving for retirement. There's your 1 degree shift. Start it today. Exactly. So last thing we want to talk about before we get into the 1 degree shift. How much money before getting married? And we've gone a long time, so we won't go a ton into this, but I've worked with a lot of college students,
And so this was always a big topic. How much money do I need to have before I get married? It's not about the money you have. It's about the money habits you have. A lot of times getting married is actually more financially feasible than not getting married. And don't hear me and say, oh, so I should get married because it's financially feasible. You know, I should rush into marriage. No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's not your reason to get married, but is definitely, in our opinion, not a reason to not get married.
So here's the thing I want to say about it. Don't allow cultural expectations to supersede biblical expectations. So I once heard this story. If this preacher that he was preaching about marriage and purity and all this kind of stuff, and basically saying that if you know you want to get married, then why wait? You know, why allow temptation to creep in and all this kind of stuff? At the end of the sermon, this mom, I don't even know if this is a true story or not, but it's stuck with me for years. At the end of the sermon, this mom like drags her 24-year-old son up to the front, and she said, hey, your message is great and all, but what advice would you give for my 24-year-old son? He's in med school. The girl he's been dating for 5 years, she's still in school. Shouldn't they save up money? Shouldn't they be out of school before they get married, even though they know they want to get married, and all, instead of, you know, trying to do this while in school? And all the pastor did was he looked at the son and he said, well, I'm just so thankful that you and her have been able to maintain purity throughout your relationship. And the son just got super sheepish and shy and everything like that. And that was, you know.
This is such a random story.
But no, what it shows, I think, is a lot of times we allow these cultural expectations. We have to be out of school. We have to have a certain amount of money in our bank account. Doesn't matter if I've been dating this person for 3 years. If I haven't met this cultural expectation, I'm going to meet that before I get married, when in reality, the Bible doesn't talk about a minimum amount of money you have to have.
Or age or degree like in your frame.
Yes, exactly. But what it does talk about is the importance of purity. And what it does talk about is how God desires our sanctification. And the first thing after in 1 Thessalonians, when he talks about, for this is God's will in your life, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality. And so I just think it's important that, you know, don't place cultural expectations over biblical expectations. I once heard someone say that they had to have at least $30,000 saved before getting married, and this was a person that they were in college. And
what in the world is that?
But that's a great goal to have. But that's not a necessity. I've known so many people that they literally got married and they had $500 between the two of them. You know, there is not this minimum amount. Of course, if you can have savings,
it's just funny for me to think, because I'm like, what? If you can survive as an individual, then you can survive married. Yeah. You're sharing your expenses.
Exactly. And the only thing, maybe you're living at home, so maybe you don't have certain expenses. But on the whole,
anyway.
What we probably had when we got married, we probably had maybe $5,000, maybe we
paid for so much of our wedding. I'm trying to think.
We paid for a good.
We pretty much had nothing, and then we got money at our wedding, and then we like kind of beefed up our savings.
Yeah, that did. Yeah,
I would say that, but which is a privilege for sure.
That was a privilege, but even that, it was not like we were getting
basically we had no, and we started. We like slept on an air mattress for 6 months because I was like, why would we bother buying a bed? Like this feels practical, like.
Yeah,
anyway.
literally the first 6 months of our marriage, we slept on an air mattress.
And then we were like, okay, we should buy a mattress. And then we finally got a bed. I think your sister got us an IKEA gift card. I know for a fact. She got us an IKEA gift card for like Christmas, and we bought a bed with that.
But yeah, see, all that goes to show.
That to say, but we were great. We were fine.
Yeah,
exactly. We didn't hold off getting married till we had that in our bank account.
Yeah.
Anyway, that seems like a random.
Things in our marriage may have suffered, but you know.
What are you talking about?
Was just alluding to the air mattress, but
oh my gosh, whatever. Anyway, that felt like a side tangent, this whole marriage conversation, but that is a conversation that we've had a lot, especially in the context of college ministry, of how your finances should affect your decisions around marriage. So
okay,
your 1 degree shift. I know this is our longest episode yet, but again, we really care about this.
We really do. Okay, 1 degree shift. Again, I think it's going to be where you're at in your stage. But if you haven't started a budget, start a budget. If you haven't started a retirement account, start a retirement account. Why not both? If you haven't started either, do both.
Because one costs you some money, your retirement account, but one is free, starting your budget.
So if you already have both, start a Smarty Pig today to save up for miscellaneous big expenses.
Smarty Pig was that app that we talked about. I'll put all of this in the show notes too, but that was the one for your like virtual piggy banks in order to save for things that come up throughout the year.
And above all, don't forget, if you want more silly stories with Sibley, blow up Zan's email.
That's important.
But
all right, catch y'all next week.
Super thankful for you. I know this is a long episode. Super thankful for you, fam. Love you, fam. And I really do think this was really important. So thanks for taking the time to listen.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of the 1 Degree Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'd be so appreciative if you take just a few seconds to leave a rating and a quick review. We love to hear your feedback, and those ratings really do help make it easier for others to find this podcast.
And if you want to continue this chat or share your takeaways, we'd love to hear from you. Head on over to our Instagram at the 1 Degree Podcast and leave a comment or send us a DM. We can't wait to hear from you. Catch you next week, 1 Degree fam.